the team is going to drive for me is that, so Kronos is coming out with a new user interface. So that's what you're seeing here is what it's going to look like for you guys. So in the process, it's not just a look and feel that's different, but there are also pieces that internally are different. So the security group, the way workflows happen, gave us the opportunity to go through and say, we want to make sure that what we say in our playbook in terms of policies and practices, what we're teaching, how we're using Kronos, and how Kronos rules are set up are all the same, okay? So that's really what the purpose of the training is. So we're gonna start with what it's gonna look like. When you guys get done with this, Tina is gonna push out everybody's profiles. So this is what Kronos is gonna look like for you, okay? So when we talk about training videos later, there'll be pieces when we refer to the sandwich menu, which is the top left-hand corner. Those three little lines is called the sandwich menu. You guys are probably familiar already with your bell, your to-do list, right? So anything that's in your bell, like if you have a person who reports to you that has a PTO request, it's gonna appear in your bell. If you have timesheets to approve, those are gonna appear in your bell.
So that'll be after April.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
timesheet.
So the timesheet piece. So, but the PTO part we've already rolled out, so you will see that in your bell. You'll still get the emails like you did before, but this is where you can go to approve them. Okay. Any questions so far?
And this is all custom. The landing page is customizable to what you want to see.
No. This is what the landing page is. So you mean like the dashboard has the clock, timesheet, schedule?
Most important thing I use for Kronos is the attendance board, who's here and who's not.
Right.
So I always have that on my landing
Yeah.
page.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately, there are things that Kronos has taken away we don't have control over, right? So that is not gonna be there anymore. This is what you have.
They are slowly, like every couple months, they add enhancements in. So they're slowly adding some of that functionality into
Is
this.
that on the list to be added soon?
It's been asked for, but they're making sure that the existing functionality is available as far as system goes versus reports and different things like that, so.
So that is, I know that's something other people look at as well. What we were able to get back, so there are some crescent links, so you see on the start, so this is something they just recently rolled out. So Tasha had created these cool little icons, my time, my PTO, my benefits. That was gone, but they've added that back in. So, which we're happy that we can see that. So, if you clicked on it, you could see your exception report, even though that's not something here. One of the pieces that we're not going to talk about today is reporting, how you can set up reports, how you can set up charts with those. So that's something that you could have, even though it's not on your landing page. Okay.
So you can get to that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It
right?
does not look
Yes.
the same.
But it's
It's
capable
a
of being
report.
done. Okay.
No, not the way you're used to seeing it with the in-out thing. It's different.
So if someone, all right, sorry, I'll let you go.
Yeah,
I'll ask questions.
So any reporting functions, anything like that, we can talk about in a Kronos Basics. So this is just more what the look and feel is.
Sorry, I don't want to derail that. Yeah.
No, and which is fine. So, and there's going to be a lot of questions, right? So as we roll, right now the only group that's on this full time is D1 and accounting and finance.
Okay.
All right. So if we're going to start with the sandwich menu. So if you click on the sandwich menu, you're going to see three things. Right? So you see the double person icon is your team. The single person icon is just yourself, and then the star is favorites. On the mobile app, all that you're going to see is the double person and the single person. You will not see the favorites. Does not exist on the mobile app.
Yeah, and the favorites is the same as that start on this homepage.
And you can click on it, you can see just stuff that's specific to you. Okay. All right. So we're going to start right to left, and we're going to start with my team. And what we're going to look at first is schedules, because everything in Kronos is driven by schedules. So if schedules aren't correct, the standard hours when you do a PTO request is not going to be correct. The way people get paid is not gonna be correct. People incur points, right? So everything has to start with the schedule in Kronos for everything else to work, right? So it's all driven by schedules, which we found, and we're going back and there's some cleanup that we need to do. So we're gonna start with the schedule, like how can you, change a schedule, what do schedules look like? So, so we're gonna start, we'll go ahead and go into a timesheet. I'm guessing you guys are all using schedules right now. Ben, you've used them. Jason, Jason, do you use it much?
I have to change Darren's schedule.
Okay, and then. All right, so, we already have our test person pulled up, so that's great. All right. I love it.
Let me pull
All right.
up a different test person.
Okay. So, this is a quick tip. So if you, in the search bar, if you just put pound, that is Kronos shortcut for timesheet. So if you put pound somebody's name, it's gonna go directly to their timesheet without having to look up the person, go to the timesheet icon, right? So it's just a quick way to look.
So
So,
we've got some of that on this
Yeah.
brochure that we're gonna hand out on Friday. to
yeah,
you.
all of this stuff. So, and I love that Bill's taking notes. That's awesome. Okay, so we have Trinity, we're gonna look at Miss Trinity, and so sometimes, and that we have a lot of different things that we're gonna talk about on this particular one. So if Trinity comes in and she says, hey, John, I need to be able to, my typical schedule is 8 to whenever, but on Thursday, I need to come in at a different schedule, you're gonna change her for just that one specific day, okay? So how you can go about that, you can go to utilities. And a lot of this again is gonna feel the same. Go into edit schedule. Okay, so if we're gonna do just one day, right? So we're gonna go over to the day of the week that we wanna make her schedule change, and we're gonna change it on Thursday. You're gonna click in. Okay, so you're gonna choose an existing shift from the drop down. So if something currently exists, you're gonna make that change. If there's not a predefined schedule in the drop down list, you're gonna pick fixed. And you're gonna put the start and stop time for that particular schedule. And put what the standard hours are.
It doesn't calculate that for you.
Okay, and then you're gonna click save. 7 hours. Okay, so now for that one particular day, that's been changed, right? So that is Trinity's schedule currently, all right, for that one day. And this is just for a one-off kind of an exception. If you have to make a longer term, like if it's a permanent schedule change, you're gonna wanna make that schedule change, and that'll be through an ACF through your SPG, okay?
Question on that?
Yep.
So at P1, we're looking at making the shift 8.5 hours long with a half-hour unpaid break. In the person, in Trinity's setup, will that know to take the half hour out of that?
No, so the standard needs to be the amount with the lunch taken out of it,
Mm-hmm.
but the auto deduct is somewhere else, so that's determined on who sets up that person when they hire them.
Right, so if you're putting in, so to answer your question on this one.
Yep.
Right, so in this case, if you were putting that 8.5 hour schedule for her, then you are gonna enter 8 hours, 8 standard hours, right? Cause that's what she's being paid off of.
Okay, so I'd put in 10 to, say it's for 7 hours with a half-hour break, I'd put 10 to 5 o'clock, 6.5 hours.
Right, exactly.
But it would auto deduct to the 10 and the 5.
It's gonna auto deduct her, whatever has been defined as her lunch, like
Okay.
her lunch is, you
If
got
that's
that.
defined.
If it's defined, so, and that's something separate, so that's part of that, schedule cleanup that Tina and I are doing, on that, because there were multiple like 213 different schedules, and they weren't all set up correctly with the correct standard hours,
Okay.
something that we realized at T1, so.
So the lunch deduct isn't tied to the schedule, it's some other thing.
Right,
that's
so I
doing
would,
it, but yeah,
so
you put
John
the
would
schedule.
he'd put in 10 a.m., say there is that extra half hour, so he'd put 10 a.m. to 5:30, and then put in 7 hours.
Yeah.
Not 7.5.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
The
all right,
payable.
Right.
gotcha.
Yeah, so it's what's payable.
Okay,
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so, and then we'll go back out to her, so we're on, what you will notice, right, so Trinity, we've just changed her schedule for that Thursday, the 20th,
Thursday down here.
down here, this Thursday, so that's when we made a change to her schedule. of course, she's on shift 3, so probably things aren't gonna be calculated or paid correctly because you just put her on her first shift and it's a third shift timesheet, okay? But obviously this is just for, demonstration purposes.
Yep.
So if we need to, alright, we already went through that particular part of the timesheet. What we did make a difference on is on timesheets is that any time, with the exception of schedules, that you make a change to a timesheet, you will be required to make a comment, to put a comment in. Okay, so let's look at the very first one. So, Trinity comes, she's like, hey, I forgot my Kronos card, can you swipe me out, right? So what we do is we go in, that little red E, we put the time that she clocked out, and we go to save, and Kronos is gonna say, really, why did you touch her timesheet, right? So what we wanna make sure is anytime you're making any change to a timesheet, you're always documenting why, okay? You're gonna go in this particular case, the reason that you did it, right, is that she missed her punch. So in our policy, it says that in a month, if you miss 3 or more punches, that you're gonna incur half of a point, right? So the only way Kronos is gonna know if this is a missed punch is if you tell it it's a missed punch, right? So that's something we talk about during our orientation. It's something that we do. The only way that you're gonna know it is here, is through that missed punch, okay? So when the points are run at the end of the month, and there's 3 or more missed punches, she's gonna get another half a point, okay? Any questions on that? Ben?
I'll save all mine for later.
Okay, Chris, what's your
Because there's so
question?
many out of scope.
So just as a note, the missed punches only show up at the end of the month.
That's right, they only,
No, they do not.
well, when you run, you have to run your points,
Yes.
right? So when you run if you have somebody missed a punch 3 times in those first 2 weeks and you run your points, they're gonna get a half a point,
Okay.
okay? But that's a good question, all right? And we'll talk about points later, but that is something that is, and there are some sites that do this, some sites that don't. Again, that's part of the reason for this training, is to understand that that is something that is in our policies. That's something that we do talk about. That's something Kronos is set up to do. The only way that can happen is by putting that information in, okay? And the other reason why we're adding that documentation is because any modification to a timesheet, we need to document why we're doing that, right? We don't wanna, at some point, if you go in and you're, we'll talk about removing overtime, we wanna make sure that we're always saying why we're doing any kind of manual, entry or change to a timesheet, okay? Question?
Problem that we can address from the start of P1, but I know it's an issue I had at E1, was folks who clock in 2 minutes early.
Okay, so, and we'll talk, so, I mean, we can go straight to the overtime piece if we want to. Based on so schedules, again, determine the rounding rule, right?
Yep.
So if you clock in 2 minutes early, it's gonna round to your schedule, right? So 15 minutes.
No, I'm sorry, 2 minutes earlier than they're allowed to punch in. So say you've got a 15-minute rounding rule.
Right.
Alright, so instead of punching in at 6:45, they punched in at 6:43.
Right.
Which is
And
gonna add a .27 to the
Right,
end of the day,
right. So the
so.
way the rounding rule works is 15 minutes prior and 15 minutes later, it rounds to the schedule, right? Anything other than that, it's gonna pay you exactly on that time,
Which
right?
we don't want it to do.
I understand, right,
Okay.
I understand, so
Relax,
this
she's got
same
it.
thing, so if you went in, what we wanna say is you never change a punch.
Right.
Ever, right, you never modify punches, alright? So, because
Can I give you the basis of what we do normally, and you can tell me where we're wrong and what we're gonna do going forward?
So, what I was gonna say is the reason that we don't ever modify punches is the Department of Labor would have a total heyday on that, right? So we wanna make sure we're not changing punches, right? So, for that particular reason. So how do,
So
Huh? Go ahead.
what we always do is we add another, we don't change the punch, we add a line below, and we do a minus .27. So, I'm sorry?
Every day you're doing that?
Well, yeah, and if it
Okay,
happens
so-
more than a couple times, we get with that person and say, look, this is a pain in the butt, you better,
Okay.
this is when you're allowed to clock in, but it happens.
Okay, so every time you do that, you're gonna have to make a comment why you're
Okay.
making that change,
Alright.
right? So the point is that we wanna make sure that that person knows, right? So if we're clocking in, not clocking in, right? That they don't clock in prior to that time. But when you do that day that you're removing their time, you need to let them know. Okay? And you would put that in your comment section, okay? Because the other piece of it is overtime, right? So in our policy, it says that any unapproved overtime will not be paid, right? So if you have, we have had some managers that get into the habit of going and just taking overtime out, not talking to that person, right, or not making that comment on there. So, what we don't wanna do is every day that we're removing time, right? Because overtime only happens at the end of the week. So the way that you would remove overtime, we're ready to go into that piece. You ready to move down to that one?
Yeah, we don't have overtime.
We don't have any overtime?
But we can
I can add some overtime, we can pretend there's overtime. So where you're gonna remove the overtime, because it typically won't occur until the fourth or fifth day, right, in the time, in the week. So we're gonna pretend like on Miss Trinity that she has some overtime, you're gonna click the overtime category code for our pay to say we're gonna remove, however much, if she had, 0.2 something hours of overtime, we're gonna enter that. And then it's gonna ask you, what's your comment, and you'll put not approved. Okay, so that way you're always documenting anything that you're doing with that timesheet. Because there are times that maybe you have asked somebody to come in to help with an inventory, they're gonna, they need to help with a line change, and maybe it's just for that particular week, that we're gonna approve that overtime. So if overtime is okay, you're not gonna make any adjustments, it's just for that unapproved time, okay? Questions?
Same for lunches, if they try to say that they took a lunch and, they didn't come to, say Marie comes back in town, skips a lunch, I didn't approve the skip lunch. I know how to cancel a lunch, and I know it takes the lunch out automatically, is there a way to, like, note that? So when she's looking at her time card, it will say, like a general note, is it just like before?
Yeah, so if you're gonna cancel lunch, you still have the same.
Right, so I'm not canceling lunch, I didn't approve that, but like, the note's still there is my point.
Yeah.
Cause if someone
Yes.
says, well, I told you I canceled my lunch, you can put a note right there that it wasn't approved when we talked on this date.
Yeah, you can still put a note there, so the notes that you're putting here on the side are not gonna
Right.
appear like those particular notes, those comments on the side, but you can still see those comments.
I still like it, cause I forget last week when it comes to those times. But,
Yeah.
It's good to have record.
Yeah, and that's really, it's like, I can't always remember what I did even at the beginning of the day, right? So if I put it in at the time, I'm making a modification, which is why we did this, is to help us to document better. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, so when we're talking about time off codes or pay codes, one thing that we have made a change to, is the time off codes that you guys are gonna be able to enter. So if you, Tina's gonna, on this particular one, let's pick one on, that we don't have. So these are the reason codes that you have. So you have leave of absence, FMLA, military, and personal. And then there's reason. We'll talk about what reason is, okay? So so in the past, you also were able to put PTO in, right? You're not gonna be able to put that in directly on the timesheet. And the reason for that is because putting it on the timesheet, Kronos doesn't have the ability to say, oh, they're -40, or it has to be taken in certain increments, so it'll just allow you to put whatever on the timesheet without that, rule, okay? The other thing that we used to give you was the ability to put in bereavement, holiday, or, unpaid, yeah. So bereavement is still something that your SPGs are gonna do, because there are rules around, bereavement. Kronos can't interpret an uploaded PDF document to say, oh, it's grandma gets this many hours, right? So that's something that still the SPG will enter that. Holiday pay is all based on rules, company policy, and based on standard hours that we just talked about in the schedules. And then unpaid time. So unpaid time, was introduced, last year, that we would put that in, so it's, if you didn't have the ability to put in FMLA or put in personal leave, people were putting unpaid. So in 2019, we had 4,000 hours of qualified leave hours that were entered. We had 15,000 hours of unpaid time entered and 50,000 hours of PTO time. So 15,000 hours, what were those for, right? And in some cases, it might be somebody who had 3 weeks, that it was just all coded as unpaid time, but no documentation for that, right? So since we have no way to accrue unpaid time, we're not putting unpaid time in here. But what we can do, so you have somebody who maybe they don't have any PTO, and you are saying, I'm gonna let you take that dentist appointment, and you're gonna be gone for the whole day for that, even though you don't have PTO, you're gonna take their schedule out for that day, right? So they don't incur a point, but you're not gonna put unpaid time. Okay, any questions on that? Ben looks like he's having a lot of fun.
I mean, it's just. Oh, never mind.
Okay.
Jury duty too.
Yeah, jury duty is also something that the SPGs will be putting in. All right, so we're gonna talk about, like the PTO piece, right? So if we had somebody who is on a qualified leave, and our people will be initiating their leaves themselves, and there's reasons around that, we'll get into that in the employee self-service piece. But if your SPG comes to you and says, hey, I've got somebody that's on FMLA, you can put those FMLA hours in for them. So whether they're consecutive or it's an intermittent leave, you'll get the information on that frequency and duration and when you can put that information in. But we're gonna say Miss Trinity in this particular, you can see right here she's absent, right, on Thursday. But really this was an FMLA day, okay? So we're gonna put in FMLA, click on LOA, FMLA, and we're gonna put, because it was a whole day, we're gonna put 8 hours. And we're gonna save. And we're gonna put the reason why you put that in, approved FMLA, and okay. And then we're gonna go back and we're gonna look at Miss Trinity. So you see she's got 8 hours of FMLA entered here, right? So we're just putting raw hours, the bulk hours in, we're not putting punches, because punches would indicate that she actually worked, but she didn't, she called off. But part of the policy is that we go paid before unpaid time. So in Miss Trinity's case, we need to put PTO in for her if she has any accrued. So the process for adding PTO on this day is we're gonna go up to time off, yeah, request.
Is it capable to customize for quick links for some of these things, so you don't have to navigate that bar every time?
Yeah, you can also type in here,
Okay, cool.
but
Yeah.
you find in the right
Right.
one of that.
Yeah, until you kinda get used to your stuff list, because it's not they're not all housed in the same area. So you're gonna pick your person, so there's Miss Trinity, you're gonna click on her and apply. Alright, so you can see she has already information, you don't have to remember which day she had her FMLA on that you're gonna put it on, so you're gonna click on that to start your request. She actually has a couple FMLA days. Click on start request, we're gonna put PTO, we're gonna put full day, and put FMLA. And submit. And you can see she already has some hours in there,
Which is the FMLA.
yeah, and we're gonna submit. And okay. Alright, so what you're gonna see is something that is not yet approved is gonna be in these dash bars on the PTO, so you know that it's hanging out. But you have applied 8 hours of PTO to her leave, alright? So if on the next day, Miss Trinity, you saw she's also absent, but it was a call off and it wasn't for FMLA specific, so we're gonna put PTO in here. Because she's like, I'm calling off, but I still wanna use my PTO, I'm gonna put it in, submit my request. Okay, so now she has 2 days of PTO. This PTO request is gonna appear in your bell that you have to approve, but if we go back to her timesheet on Miss Trinity, let's go down to our days down here. Oh, we have to approve her PTO for you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let Miss Tina approve her PTO. What I want you to see is what we would use reason for, right? So even though you can take, it's gonna remove your reason code of absence after we approve Miss Trinity. We got lots of time for her. She doesn't like time to work very much. Okay,
So at the onset, we're gonna have to do these requests, the supervisors have to create the request and then go in and approve the request. So it's,
so they will be initiating their PTO request. So in this particular case, she could request it or you can request it, either way. All right, but all the requests will go through this request process, through an action.
okay, cause that's ridiculously less efficient than what it used to be.
Okay, so there are reasons why that we're
Okay.
doing it this way, so,
Some of those.
right. So, oh, you're gonna go through some of the requests?
Yeah.
Okay,
Just to kind of.
Just real quick, so, calls off, hourly Alec calls off sick, calls in.
Mhm.
His responsibility,
You've just been demoted.
yeah, his responsibility to put in PTO time,
Or he doesn't get paid for it.
Yes,
but he doesn't
But-
wanna get paid for it. Now
Then
he's,
it's a point.
okay, so our policy is paid before unpaid,
Right.
right?
right,
So hourly Alec doesn't really get to make that choice, right?
Mhm.
If he has accrued PTO, now he doesn't have to go negative, right? But if he has 16 hours of accrued PTOs today, and he's like, I don't wanna use it, it's like, too bad.
right.
Policy says
Right.
paid before unpaid, and that's in every case, right? So that's why we have this for you to be able to initiate a PTO on his behalf.
Now, is it, whose responsibility is it to do that? Because I know right now, there's no documentation in the playbook or an orientation that it's your responsibility to go in front of. Will they be
That will be
signing a
part of-
training?
Yes, we did, when we were at D1, all the hourly people signed that
So that
document to
they're-
say that they understand.
they're
That is their
accountable for it?
responsibility, yes.
So hourly people all need to have access to the internet, the app, what you will. Okay.
When we do the training, yes, so we have our self-service training on Friday,
Okay.
right? So they will have this, like, all PTO, that was our big thing. So one of the other pieces that if they don't have the internet or they don't have a smartphone, we're gonna add a PTO request for time clock. So they can request their PTO at the time clock. Okay, so we will resolve that issue as well, so that there should be no reason. And again, if they're like, I can't do any of that, I don't know how to use the time clock, they can come to you and say, could you put that PTO request for me? And you're gonna know how to do that.
So this is putting more of the,
Giving it back to the people,
Back to
right?
the
So we're
people.
empowering the people to manage their own information,
unless why didn't
In
you
Kronos.
do this for me?
yes,
Okay, that's fine.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at Miss Trinity. So this is the reason why we're going through this process, and yes, it may feel like it's less efficient. But going directly to the timesheet, we're not able to enforce the rules in Kronos, okay? So we know that we can't go more than -40, right? We know that we can't take increments less than an hour, right? We can't, go negative at the end of the year. Those are our policies, right? In our playbook, that's our PTO policy. But there are many times that we're not adhering to that policy, and Kronos isn't able to help us to adhere to that policy by going directly to the timesheet. So let's say Miss Trinity wants, like, oh, look, I've got 7.397 hours, I'm gonna clock out early, I wanna make it an even, I wanna get my full 8, so I'm gonna put in a weird number, right? I wanna use up all my PTO. If I go directly to the timesheet, it's gonna let me put 7.39 hours. But if I go through the process, it's gonna say, sorry, it has to be in 1 hour increments only, right? Submit the request. If we wanna take off this, like, oh, I've got all this time, I'm gonna take all this, I'm gonna take my 8 hours per day, submit my request, it's gonna come up and say, you're gonna be negative, you can't go below -40. This is the only way for us to be able to, one, help it make it smarter for you guys, right? So that you're not having to stop and think, well, how much PTO does she have? What is available? What can I do? What can I not do? This is gonna help us do that.
Have they been here those 90 days?
Yeah, that's the other piece, is if somebody's still in their orientation period,